People often say that when you lose a loved one, what you miss most is their voice. But for me, it's the silence. The silence left behind by my grandmother Evelyn wasn't an emptiness, it was a strange kind of resonance, as if she were still there quietly, watching quietly, choosing. The climax doesn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it arrives in a single sentence. To Claire Monroe, I leave $1 and my eternal love. If you've ever been overlooked in your own family, pushed aside because of your quiet demeanor, or labeled as needing nothing, just because you never asked for anything, then you might understand me. Comment below, and let me know if you've ever been in a room where everyone looked through you as if you were air. I sat there that day, in a meeting room smelling of old wood and polish with dim light filtering through a half-open window, the breeze tugging at the curtains as if trying to witness it all. Mr. Whitaker, our family lawyer, stood at the head of the table. He was over 70 with silver hair neatly combed and a voice like gravel smoothed by sunlight. He opened a file, put on his glasses, and began reading Evelyn's will in a warm, steady tone. Jake, my younger brother, sat across the table, back straight, clean-shaven, looking like he was interviewing for a job at a financial firm. His suit was slightly tight at the shoulders, but clearly expensive. My mother Linda sat beside him, her eyes flickering with expectation and exhaustion. My father Philip maintained his usual silence, the kind that only appeared when he felt out of control. To my grandson, Jake Monroe, I knew the words were coming, but I still felt my hands tighten on my knees. I leave the house at 1186 Elm Street, the Toyota Camry, and all savings accounts in my name. My mother let out a breath she'd probably been holding since the funeral. Jake smiled, not too obviously, but clearly relieved. He leaned back in his chair as if life had finally acknowledged his existence. I looked down at the table, avoiding everyone's gaze. I knew my turn would come last, always last. To my granddaughter, Claire Monroe, Mr. Whitaker's voice paused as if waiting for a reaction. I swallowed hard. I leave $1 and my eternal love. That was it. Someone chuckled softly, maybe a relative joining via Zoom. Or Jake. I didn't look. My mother squeezed Jake's hand again and said, almost exhaling, "That girl? She's always been so independent." No one looked at me. I didn't blame them. Not because I felt nothing, but because I was so used to that feeling, being seen as someone who didn't need anyone, who didn't ask for anything, who didn't truly exist. I'm Claire. Claire Monroe, 32 years old. No husband, no kids, a freelance financial consultant living in a small apartment on the east side of town. No MBA, no big bank job. But I know how to manage money. I know how to live without bothering anyone. And somehow that made people think I didn't need to be remembered. The will reading ended, and I wasn't sure how much time had passed. Jake shook Mr. Whitaker's hand like a businessman sealing a deal. My mother immediately asked about the paperwork for the transfer. My father stood up last. I didn't wait for my turn. I just stood, grabbed my bag, and walked out. No one stopped me. The wind outside had picked up. The sky was covered in a thick layer of gray clouds, heavy like a wool blanket. In my bag, I still carried the letter Evelyn had written to me 6 months earlier, before she fell ill. The paper was worn, the folds frayed, but every word was still vivid in my memory. Never let them mistake your silence for absence, little one. The quiet ones carry truths louder than any words. Evelyn was always something special. Not loud, not showy, but enough to make me, a shy child slipping into the kitchen every afternoon, feel seen. She was the only one who knew I went vegetarian on Mondays. The only one who noticed I preferred warm yellow lights over harsh white ones. The only one who asked about my sleep instead of my grades. So that day when I received only $1, it hurt. Not because I thought I deserved more, but because I didn't understand. Why would she, the one who always saw me, quietly choose to make me invisible in front of the entire family? I didn't know that 3 days later a call from Mr. Whitaker would change everything. A call that began with a voice softer than the one at the reading. "Claire, Evelyn left something. Just for you." I didn't respond right away. Maybe because I wasn't ready to hear something that would change my life. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Some calls come at moments when you think your life is settled. Not because you're expecting something, but because you believe that if something unexpected were to happen, it would have happened already. But no, life doesn't send warnings. 3 days after the will reading, I was stirring oatmeal in my kitchen when the phone rang. The screen showed G. Whitaker. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me knew I couldn't avoid it forever. Claire, Mr. Whittaker's voice came through with a slight crackle. I hope I'm not interrupting. I'm still living normally, I replied, my voice lower than usual. Not exactly shocked by $1. He chuckled softly. No, I don't think Evelyn would let the story end there. In fact, she left something, just for you. And I'm only allowed to hand it over if you come alone. I didn't answer immediately. The spoon in my hand kept stirring on autopilot. Inside, something stirred not hope, but a premonition. That something much deeper was about to be pulled from the shadows. I went to Mr. Whittaker's office the next morning. The same room with slanted light from a large window, the smell of old wood mixed with stale coffee. But this time it was just him and me. He stood when I entered as if I were more important than I'd ever thought myself to be. Thank you for coming, he said, locking the door behind me. The soft click of the lock felt like the closing of something deeply private. He pulled a thick envelope from a drawer, the kind of paper used for important matters. On it, in Evelyn's slow, deliberate handwriting, was my name, Claire Monroe. I've kept this for nearly 4 years, he said, placing the envelope on the table. She instructed me to give it to you only if you came alone. No copies, no explanations. Only one person was to know. I touched the envelope but didn't open it. Something sacred and fragile made me want to take a deep breath before touching the final words of someone who was gone. I'll leave you alone, Mr. Whittaker said, then quietly left the room. The room fell silent. No car horns, no footsteps, just me and the letter. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, slightly textured, folded in half. I recognized her handwriting, each word chosen with care. No cross-outs, no hesitation. Just a certainty that sent a shiver through me. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I've done something I avoided my whole life, trusted myself enough to choose someone worthy, without explaining it to the rest of the world. You've always been the one who listens when no one speaks. You know which kitchen switch sticks. You know how to bake without a mixer. I never said it, but I always saw you. When you were 23 and moved to Boston, everyone thought you were running away. But I knew you went to stand on your own without needing anyone's permission. I always believed you could because you don't need to be seen to exist. And so I'm leaving you something I hid from the world. A trust fund in Switzerland opened in 1989. Current value $4,200,000. You are the sole beneficiary. I set the letter down on the table. My heart didn't race. It sank, each beat settling into the soft earth of truth. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let the silence fill the room. She had hidden this from everyone. No mention in the will. No trace in the paperwork. No one knew except me, and now Mr. Whittaker. I read on. You won't find this money in any public document. I hid it not out of fear, but because I knew some wouldn't understand why I chose you. Some would think you don't need anything, but they don't know how much you've given in silence. They didn't see you give up your scholarship for a friend who didn't qualify. They don't know you send money to Aunt Margaret every month, someone who has no one else. No one asked, but I saw. Claire, you are not invisible. They just looked with the wrong eyes. Use this money not to live differently, but to help those who live like you did. Those who quietly keep the world from breaking. I folded the letter. This time my hands trembled, not because of the money, but because someone trusted me enough to hand me something immense, without conditions. Without demanding I prove myself. Have you ever been trusted unconditionally? If you have, leave a comment. Because in a world full of doubt, trust isn't just rare, it's what makes life more meaningful. When Mr. Whittaker returned, he said nothing. He just looked at me as if he'd witnessed something sacred. And even though I didn't yet know what I'd do with this knowledge, understood one thing. I was no longer the one who received just $1 in the will. I was the one Evelyn chose. Not to inherit money, but to carry forward something she hadn't finished. And I would begin in Geneva. People often think a legacy is something from the past, a house, a bank account, a photo, in a wooden frame. But I realized that sometimes a legacy isn't what's left behind, it's what remains unfinished. 2 weeks after Mr. Whittaker's call, I landed in Geneva in early winter. No one knew I was going. I didn't tell my family, didn't post on social media, didn't bring anyone along. Just me and a letter in my purse carefully folded like a nameless map. Geneva unfolded before me as it must have in Evelyn's memory, a city of order, quiet, and soft light. The sky was gray, but the streets were clean. The wind was sharp, but not cold. There was a kind of peace that made you reluctant to break the silence with words. Banque Etienne and Fils. The bank sat on a small cobblestone street with no advertising sign, just a simple brass plaque engraved with its name like a whisper. When I stepped inside, an older woman in a neat gray suit greeted me by name, Miss Monroe. "We've been expecting you." I started slightly. Evelyn must have arranged every detail. The woman led me through 2 glass doors down a long carpeted hallway without a single footprint. No sound, no whispers. Just the sense that everything here knew how to keep a secret. In a room at the end of the hall, a man stood as I entered. Tall, thin, with bright eyes and a navy suit. "Miss Monroe," he extended his hand. "I'm Henry Morel. A pleasure." Evelyn was a woman like no other. I shook his hand firm just enough. Something about him made me think he knew I'd come, before I even knew it myself. "What did she say about me?" I asked. Henry smiled faintly. "That you don't need to be seen to exist." I bit my lip, trying to stay composed. Henri invited me to sit, then took a black leather folder from a cabinet and placed it on the table as if unveiling an ancient legacy. "The Hart Fund," he said. "Named after your middle name, Evelyn Hart Monroe." I froze. I'd never thought of Hart as her middle name. I only knew my mother never used it. They always called her Evelyn short sharp. Henri opened the folder. Inside were statements, allocation plans, and what took my breath away, handwritten notes from Evelyn. "The fund's current value, $4.2 million, he said. "But the real treasure isn't the money, it's how she intended it to be used." I read each line. Item 1, emergency financial support for women caring for elderly relatives. Item 2, scholarships for women over 45 returning to college. Item 3, microcredit for single mothers starting businesses. Item 4, free financial counseling for immigrant women. Next to each item were handwritten notes for women like me. Like Claire. Like those who never ask but always deserve. Are you in a similar situation? Have you ever seen your mother, your aunt, or yourself struggle in a financial world? No one bothers to explain. Share in the comments, because maybe someone needs your story to start anew. I looked up at Henri. She wanted me to manage all of this. Not just manage, he said, but guide. She believed you'd see what others miss, because you've lived that way. I swallowed hard. Suddenly, this responsibility wasn't just a number. It was faces I didn't yet know, sleepless nights over bills, women like Evelyn and like me. Henri pulled out another sheet. This is the last thing she wrote after meeting me last year. Not legally binding, just her wish. I opened it. "Dear Claire, money is a tool, but trust is a seed. Don't let this money be spent, let it be sown. Sow it into those who seem invisible. Sow it into a future you can't yet see but can feel. I trust you, not because you're my only granddaughter, but because you understand what I lived to preserve silence is not surrender. Do this your way, but don't forget why I began." I folded the paper. My heart swelled with an emotion I couldn't name. Maybe gratitude. Maybe the gentle pain of realizing someone had always been watching, even when I didn't dare hope. "We'll support you with legal and financial matters," Henri said. "But you'll make the final decisions." I stood still, clutching the paper like it was my grandmother's heartbeat. "Thank you," I said, "for trusting her. And now for trusting me." Henri nodded. "It's not trust, it's seeing." I left the bank as dusk settled. Lake Geneva reflected the golden orange light of day's end. I stood there taking a deep breath, feeling as if Evelyn was somewhere not in the wind, but within me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the hotel window, rereading the folder's pages, underlining notes, picturing each woman, writing down small actions I could start tomorrow. I knew I didn't have all the answers, but I had something more valuable, a reason to begin. If someone told you a legacy worth over $4 million could start in an office with no sign above a laundromat, would you believe them? 3 months after leaving Geneva, I signed a lease for a modest space on the east side of town. 2 small rooms with beige walls, low ceilings, worn carpet, and a window that jammed when it rained. The office had once been an abandoned dental practice, tucked above Sparkle Wash, a laundromat running for 24 years. No one knew it existed, and honestly, I liked it that way. I named it the Evelyn Trust Center. Not a company, not a charity, nothing grand. Just a name to remind me why I started and for whom. I didn't put up a sign outside. No flyers. No ads. I started with a single sheet of paper posted on bulletin boards at the local church and library. Free financial counseling for women, no paperwork, no proof required. Have you ever embarked on a journey without a map, where each step you took drew the path? If you have, share a line, because my journey began that way. My first client was Lorraine, 61, widowed, a former medical secretary now caring for her late husband through a photo and a $38,000 medical debt. She came with wary eyes, a soft voice, and a worn shoulder bag stuffed with bills and rejection letters. "You don't need my social security number," I said as she fumbled for her wallet. "I'm not a bank." We sat together for 3 hours. I showed her how to consolidate her debts, negotiate with collection agencies, and write letters for emergency payment deferrals. For the first time, I saw a woman cry, not from loss, but from being understood. "No one's ever explained this in my language," she said, clutching the simple budget I'd drawn by hand. "You're the first." A week later, she returned with banana bread and a new smile. Her bills were deferred interest rates reduced. She said she'd start saving $5 a week. I didn't say anything, just nodded and noted the amount, a beginning no one saw. My second client was Camille, 47, a single mother of 2 teenage boys working at a diner open until 2 a.m. She once believed savings were a luxury for people like her. We started with $30. 6 months later, she had over $100 in a joint savings account with her eldest son. "For the first time, I'm not afraid of tomorrow," she said, then laughed. Sounds like a movie line. I quietly wrote in my notebook, second person starting over. No fireworks needed. Each story in this small office stayed private. No thank you videos, no viral posts. Just afternoons with handwritten spreadsheets, unexpected boxes of cookies on my desk, and scribbled notes saying, "Thank you, Claire," tucked into envelopes. Someone once asked me, "Why not make this bigger? You have the money." I just smiled. Because if you've lived a life where silence was your only way to survive, you'd understand not everything loud is effective. And not everyone needs to see something to know it exists. What do you think? Does something good have to come with recognition? Comment and let me know, because I believe some things are quiet but more enduring than any applause. For the first 3 months, I didn't take a salary. I didn't need to. I lived off my personal savings and small interest from the fund. I didn't want to profit from kindness. I just wanted to live up to Evelyn's words, "Don't let the money be spent, let it be sown." I started writing handwritten thank you letters to everyone who came, not because they helped me, but because they dared to start over. I didn't want them to feel like cases needing aid. They were partners, students, keepers of a legacy. One late spring afternoon, I stayed at the office longer than usual. Light rain fell outside. The window was still jammed, so I propped it open with a wooden pen for a sliver of air. I opened the drawer and took out Evelyn's letter. The folds were still crisp as if it had never been opened. I reread the final line, "Help the girls like you, the ones no one thinks are listening." I thought of 15-year-old Claire sitting quietly at the end of the family dinner table, never asked about her day, never choosing the meal, never mentioned in toasts. Then I thought of the 32-year-old woman sitting here with a letter, a mission, and a worn desk with her name taped under the glass. No one handed me power. But I had something more valuable, the chance to prove I didn't need to be named to be recognized. Some apologies don't start with "I'm sorry." They start with silence, a look, an unannounced visit, and sometimes with finding a notebook no one knew existed. That morning I was brewing coffee when I heard a knock at the office door. Not rushed or impatient, but tentative, as if the person outside was asking, "Am I still allowed in?" Jake stood there, denim jacket, slightly messy hair, no smile. The last time I saw my brother was at the will reading. Back then, he shook Mr. Whitaker's hand like someone finally validated after years of waiting. Today, he stood before me like someone who'd lost something he hadn't realized was precious. "Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. The office was empty. Only the steady hum of the laundromat below reminded me life went on even during a difficult conversation. Jake sat across from my desk, eyes scanning the room with no sign, no plaques, no grandeur. "I cleared out Gran's house," he began. "Last week. Mom said to take anything usable. The cousins grabbed the electronics. I stayed silent, waiting for the real reason. I found an old notebook, hidden under a drawer in her bedroom. I nodded slightly. I knew Evelyn hid important things where no one would look, just like how she lived. Jake opened his backpack and pulled out a brown leather notebook, its spine peeling pages dog-eared. He placed it on the desk and slid it toward me. "I think this belongs to you." I opened it. The first page held Evelyn's familiar handwriting. "Claire, if one day you need to remember why I chose you, read what I never said." The next pages were scattered notes precise from years ago. Claire paid Aunt Margaret's electric bill May 2017. Told no one. Claire left groceries at the neighbor's door after their layoff. Note, I'm just someone who heard you needed this. Claire sent Mom a birthday card signed as Gran when no one remembered to wish her well. Jake said nothing, but I could see his throat move as if swallowing something heavy. I read it all, he said quietly, every line. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to hide, but to gather the emotions buried for so long. And then Jake continued, I got to this. He pulled a folded sheet from the notebook, newer paper clearly added later. It was a long paragraph written in Evelyn's final year. Jake is a good boy. But he's still learning to see beyond what's in front of him. He needs external validation to feel enough. Claire doesn't. She gives without needing to be known. She lives as if her presence is reason enough to be kind. I chose her not because she's perfect, but because she understands silence isn't fragility. I set the paper down. My heart didn't race, it slowed, each beat stretching the weight of the moment. I used to think Jake whispered that you didn't need anything. You were always independent, strong. You didn't need a house, a car, or anyone's care. I looked up. And so you thought I didn't need to be chosen. Jake clasped his hands on his lap. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a space for acceptance. You know, his voice trembled slightly when I read those lines. I felt ashamed. Not because Gran didn't choose me, but because I never really saw you. Have you ever felt ashamed for overlooking someone for years, not out of hate, but because you never tried to understand? If you as leave a word not for me, but for the person you once forgot. You don't need to apologize, I said after a pause. But if you're here to start over, you're in the right place. Jake looked up. His eyes held no distance, no arrogance, no role-playing. Just a brother trying to say something without saying it all. You need someone who can teach others from their own wounds, I said. Think you've learned enough? Jake laughed softly with tears. Not yet, but I want to. And this time, I'll listen. That night I wrote in my notebook third person starting over. No excuses needed. I placed Evelyn's notebook back in the drawer, not to hide, but to keep. A reminder that sometimes what's forgotten is what wakes us most. Some apologies come through actions, not words. And sometimes forgiveness doesn't need to be declared, just an empty chair and someone brave enough to sit. A week after Jake left Evelyn's notebook on my desk, he returned. No appointment, no call. Just a knock as I was cleaning up after a long consultation with a mother of 3, escaping a predatory loan. Jake wore a rolled-up shirt, no suit, no phone in hand. He didn't look like someone here to help. He looked like someone starting from the bottom. What do you need? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Not what you need, Jake replied. What I need, a chance. I sat, leaning on the desk, looking at him as if weighing something. But really, I was listening to what he didn't say. I saw the nights he lay awake with pride. The times he was jealous silently of my stability without validation. And now I saw him here, shedding the polished exterior of the chosen one, to ask for a place in this unmarked office. I don't need someone to make coffee, I said. Then teach me something, Jake replied. Anything, even sweeping the floor. Have you ever given someone a second chance, not based on their words, but on what they were willing to do quietly? Share if you've let someone start over even by simply standing beside you. I pulled a spare chair from the corner and set it by my desk. Sit. Observe silently for a week. No questions, no input, nothing. Just watch. Jake sat. No objections, no avoidance. And for the first time I believed he wasn't here for himself, but for someone else. The first week I had Jake organize old client files. No computer access, no handling money. Just sorting handwritten letters, notes, and budgets from the women who'd come to this office. One day he found a letter from Camille, the single mother I'd helped. She wrote Claire, thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. Jake handed me the letter without preamble, but I saw something shift in his eyes. On the 5th day, when a client arrived 30 minutes late because she couldn't afford the bus, Jake drove her home without me asking. He only said don't clock their time like office hours. They don't live like us. I didn't praise him, just nodded. Because kindness doesn't need fanfare, it needs continuation. On the 7th day, Jake asked, You really weren't mad when Gran chose you without saying anything. I looked up from the files. Not unmad, but I knew being mad wouldn't change anything. She didn't owe anyone an explanation, not even me. She trusted. That was enough. Jake lowered his head. I don't think I've ever done anything to earn that kind of trust. I closed the notebook. Then start today. One afternoon, we visited Lorraine, my first client. She'd just cleared part of her debt after a second round of negotiations. Seeing Jake with me, she didn't ask about our relation, or why a man in a button-up driving a Ford was sorting papers. She just said, "This young man seems well raised." Jake looked at me bashful but warm. "Have you ever been recognized not for your past, but for your present effort? If you've had that moment, I invite you to share a line because someone finding themselves might need to read it now." After 2 weeks, I let Jake lead a simple consultation. An immigrant client wanted to open her first bank account. Jake explained savings accounts, interest options, and how to request lower maintenance fees. His voice was steady, not performative. He didn't impose knowledge, just shared what he'd learned. When the client left, I asked, "How'd it feel?" Jake smiled faintly, like I was never taught this, not in college, but at home. I nodded. "You're not the only one." That night, I sat alone and wrote in my notebook, fourth person, starting over by listening. No one taught me how to forgive, but Evelyn showed me how to start over, not with logic, but with an empty chair beside me. Some lives don't need grand miracles. Just someone to sit down, open a spreadsheet, and say, "We'll do this one step at a time." I met Lorraine one June afternoon. The sky was milky gray, not raining, but cold enough to make everything feel fragile. She walked into the office, small-framed scarf tied unevenly, carrying a paper bag stuffed with bills, a notebook, and a few mints. "I don't know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. I smiled and pointed to a chair. "Start by sitting down." Lorraine, 61, was a widow. Her husband died nearly a year ago after a long battle with cancer. They had no children. And what lingered more than loneliness was a $38,000 medical debt. "They keep calling my house," she whispered. "All I have left is the car. If I sell it, I can't get to the store. If I don't, I'll have to skip meals to pay the interest." We sat together for nearly 3 hours. I opened my laptop, created a new Excel sheet. No fancy colors, no complex charts, just simple columns. Income, fixed expenses, debt interest rates. "Have you ever used a spreadsheet?" I asked. Lorraine shook her head. I was more scared of Excel than my savings account. We started step by step. I showed her how to calculate compound interest, consolidate debt into a lower rate loan, write deferral letters, and most importantly, read a bank statement without shame. When I printed a weekly budget broken into clear parts, Lorraine stared at the paper like it was the first thing that truly belonged to her. I understand it," she gasped. Then she cried. Not from pain, but because, for the first time in months, someone showed her how to look at her life without judgment, without making her feel less. Have you ever felt that? When someone trusts you enough to teach you something you thought you'd never grasp? If you have shared a line because someone out there feeling inadequate needs to know they're not alone. A week later, Lorraine returned with homemade cookies and news that 2 collection agencies agreed to lower interest rates if she paid under a new 12-month plan. The car stayed. Meals weren't halved anymore. I asked if she felt more confident. "I don't need confidence," she said. "I need to know I'm not stupid." Her words silenced me. How many of us have felt stupid just because no one explained things in our language? No one sat down, looked us in the eye, and said, "You deserve to understand this." Lorraine started coming weekly, not for advice, but to help me organize appointments. She said being useful made her feel young. Some days she brought a notebook with money-saving tips written in purple ink. "Shop for groceries on Tuesdays, fewer people, lower prices. Don't eat while watching TV, you'll consume more without noticing. Track expenses on paper, not your phone." I pinned her tips to the bulletin board in the waiting area. Under each, I wrote, "Suggested by Lorraine, student-turned-guide." One quiet afternoon, she said, "Claire, do you know why Evelyn chose you?" I paused. I think because she knew I wouldn't spend the money on loud things. Lorraine shook her head. "No. She chose you because you don't try to help anyone. You make them help themselves." I didn't respond, just nodded and opened a new spreadsheet. "You know, many people who come here don't need rescuing. They need to be seen, to be taught without being scolded, to be asked for their opinion without being dismissed. A simple spreadsheet can sometimes be a door out of years of shame." That night I wrote in my notebook, fifth person, starting over with a tool they once feared most. Lorraine didn't get rich, but she became indispensable to the office. She knew which clients needed extra time, who forgot appointments, who arrived 10 minutes early. She was a clock without hands, precise in intuition. Not everyone starts at 0. Some start below it with a deep doubt that saving is for others. I met Camille one late autumn day when the sun turned pale gold and dry leaves piled outside the laundromat. She came unannounced with the look of someone used to being unwelcome. "I heard about this place from Lorraine," she said. Not sitting, not looking directly. She said, "No one here calls you lazy." I nodded and pointed to the chair. Camille, 42, was a former waitress now, part-time at a grocery store. She raised 2 teenage boys, hourly wages, no insurance, no savings, no bank account. "I don't know what I'm earning for," she said bluntly. "Can't buy a house, can't afford extra classes for the kids, can't go anywhere fun. So I spend what comes." I didn't judge, just asked, "Have you ever tried saving?" Camille gave a bitter laugh. "Saved, then took it out. Worse than nothing." I opened a blank spreadsheet and turned the screen toward her. "Then let's try again, but this time with a plan." We started with the simplest thing, opening a savings account, with no ATM card, no online access, no easy withdrawals. Each week, Camille put in $25, taken straight from her paycheck before she could think about spending. First goal, $100. "Sounds small," she said as she signed the papers. "Big enough to show you this is real," I replied. "Do you remember the first time you saved a small amount, a sum that made you feel you weren't entirely powerless in life? If you do leave a line, because the real-life Camille might need to know she's not the only one starting at $25. The first month, Camille nearly quit. Her eldest son needed dental care and she had to borrow for the visit. I suggested pausing deposits for a week. "No," she said. "I've spent my life putting off what's for me." The next week, she deposited anyway. 3 months later, the account hit $300. Camille didn't touch a cent. She started tracking expenses by hand in her son's old school notebook. Every Monday, she came to the office, placed the notebook on my desk, and said, "This week I spent $131. Saved $19. I didn't grade her, didn't praise, just smiled and asked new goal for next week. Camille laughed, her first since coming here. "Next week, no coffee shop. I'll brew at home." By the 5th month, I introduced her to a partner bank for an emergency savings account. Camille sat tall, answered clearly asked questions she was surprised she understood. "I used to think people were born knowing this stuff," she said on the way back. "I didn't think I could get it." I said nothing, just looked at her like she was a seedling sprouting in the first cold wind. By the 6th month, Camille sent a screenshot of her account. "Hundosler, $100. "I did it," she texted with a smiley face. I printed the image and pinned it to the consultation room board below the words, "Not $1, 106 months of not giving up." One quiet afternoon, Camille stayed after a session. No appointment, just a plastic container of homemade butter cookies. "I know you don't eat much sugar," she said, "but this is all I have to say, thank you." I opened the box, took the smallest cookie. "You know I said I don't need your thanks. I just need you to remember you're not weak for being poor once. You're strong for not letting it define you." Camille nodded. "First time since 1998. I feel secure." I wrote that in my notebook in red ink, 6th person, starting over from a small deposit and new trust. You know no one teaches us how to be poor and still keep dignity. But maybe we teach each other not with lectures, but with patient presence each week. The small office above the laundromat never got crowded. But each person who came left a mark, not because they changed the world, but because they dared to change themselves. Some apologies don't come from words, but from a look when someone can't brush their own hair. I got the call one early April morning. The local hospital. Linda Monroe, my mother, admitted for a suspected minor stroke. The doctor said she was alert cognitive, but needed monitoring and physical therapy. I took the call, wrote the address, grabbed my coat and went. Didn't ask if anyone else was coming. Didn't wait. In my head, one absurd thought looped. Does she remember who I am? My mother lay in the hospital bed, her face slightly lopsided on the left, her voice hoarse but clear. She turned when I entered, not surprised, not joyful. Just said, slowly, "You came." I nodded. "I'll handle what's needed." She didn't ask more. I didn't need to explain. 2 days later, I brought her home with the doctor's approval. I rearranged her bed, rented a small wheelchair, scheduled therapy, and planned a low-sodium diet. Jake offered to help, but I declined. This I needed to do alone. During that time, my mother was mostly silent. Sometimes she told me to stop no more, wiping no more helping. But I kept going. Not to repay, not to prove anything. Just because I knew if I didn't, no one would. Have you ever cared for someone who once made you feel abandoned? Stayed when you had every right to leave? If you've had that moment, I invite you to share a line, because forgiveness sometimes needs someone to model it first. One night, I brought warm milk to her room. She was propped against pillows, hands trembling as she flipped through her medical records. "Do you remember the purple fountain pen from when you were little?" she asked, her voice suddenly light. I nodded. "The one you bought because I said I liked Gran's handwriting." She smiled. "I forgot about that, but you remembered." I set the milk on the table, silent. "I used to think..." "You didn't need me," she said. "You could do everything. You asked for so little. But now I see you didn't need me, but I should have needed you." My chest tightened, not from pain, but because her words were too true. She looked at me, her eyes no longer proud like years before. "I was wrong, Claire. I chose to love Jake more, not because I loved him more, but because I thought he needed me. And you were always quietly standing outside." I didn't answer, just sat on the edge of her bed holding her hand. "Since you were little," she continued, "you never asked me for anything. Never got mad, never argued. I thought that was easy, but it turns out you were the one I never understood." In the days that followed, I stayed at her house, cooked red with her, helped with gentle exercises. We didn't revisit the past, but the silence now wasn't distance. It was agreement, without explanation. One afternoon, she pulled an old envelope from a drawer. "This is your 18th birthday card. I never gave it to you." I opened it, reading slowly. Inside, she wrote, "My girl, I'm not good at showing it. But I see you, and I know you'll go further than I ever dared dream. Even if I don't say it, I believe in you in the quietest way." I folded it, not hiding my tears. You know, sometimes forgiveness isn't a grand act. It's just sitting beside someone who hurt you and handing them warm milk, not because they deserve it, but because you've moved past needing to prove they were wrong. I returned to the office after nearly 2 weeks. Lorraine had tidied my desk. Camille left ginger cookies. Jake had tucked a dried lavender sprig into my pen cup. Everything was still there, but I was different. I opened my notebook, wrote a new line, 7th person, starting over my mother, and me, starting over again. Not every celebration needs champagne. Some moments, the most precious thing is a frame placed just right and a look honest enough to see it. 2 weeks after my talk with Mom, Jake sent a group text housewarming this weekend. Old house, new vibe. Drop by if free. No punctuation. A few quirky emojis, classic Jake. I stared at the message for a while. Didn't reply right away. Had no intention of going. That house, now Jake's, was where Evelyn lived half her life. Every corner curtain and drawer held something. A piece of memory. A piece of me. But Saturday morning I stood before the old bookshelf in the office, opened the bottom drawer, and found the silver frame Evelyn in her ash-gray coat, standing outside the Geneva Bank, clutching her purse with both hands, as she always did for photos. I wiped the frame, slipped it into a cloth bag, and went. The house looked different. The facade was painted light beige string lights hung on the porch. Jazz played softly, the air filled with cinnamon and apple candles. Inside I saw familiar faces, relatives, Jake's friends, old neighbors. No one was surprised to see me, but no one hugged me either. Just polite nods, glances that slid away. My mother sat by the buffet table chatting with an old friend. She saw me and gave a small nod. A subtle sign, but enough for me to know she knew I was there. Jake was talking to someone from an interior design firm. He looked at the ease of someone who'd stepped out of scarcity into a new safety. I didn't join in. I quietly walked to the wooden cabinet by the sofa. There, among home magazines and scented candles, I placed the frame. No explanation, no introduction, no expectation of notice. Have you ever done something quietly just because you felt it needed doing, not for praise? If you have, share that moment. It might warm someone, silently preserving a memory for another. I wandered the house, touching window ledges, breathing the faint old wood in the kitchen. I saw new curtains, but the same rods Evelyn used. A wall, once holding art, now had a wine rack. No champagne, just red wine, canned beer, sparkling water. Laughter filled the air. A successful housewarming. But no one mentioned Gran. No one noted that without her there'd be no house. No one asked me, the only one in the room, who held her hand in her final winter, if I missed her. I was about to leave when Jake approached. He didn't speak right away. Just stood beside me looking at the frame. She hated this picture, he said softly. Said it made her look too stern. I laughed. But she kept it in her main drawer. Jake nodded. Probably because she knew. Not every photo you like is the one you keep. We stood still. For the first time in years, it didn't feel awkward. Jake turned to me, his eyes unguarded. Thanks for coming. I didn't reply right away. Just asked something I hadn't expected. Ever think, if it had been reversed, if Gran left everything to me and you got the dollar, what would you have done? Jake looked at me for a long time. I don't know, he said honestly. But if you'd placed this photo in my house, I'd probably cry. I didn't cry. But my heart twinged softly like a knock that didn't need to enter. I left the party at dusk. No one saw me out. Didn't need to. I left the frame. Not for them to remember, but for me to let go. The last night of the year had no fireworks. Just the light from a small desk lamp spilling over the old wooden table where I sat alone. The office was quiet. The laundromat below had turned off its lights. Outside, frost streaked the window like memories that wouldn't wash away. I pulled out a thin envelope folded neatly in the drawer for months. Evelyn's final letter. Not part of the will. Not sent officially. Just for me, in her familiar, slanted handwriting. Dear Claire, if you're reading this, you've chosen not to give up. And so it's time for this old woman to ask one last thing. Help the girls no one thinks are listening. I set the letter on the table, my fingers tracing the edges. She didn't say save or change the world. Just help gently, like when she taught me to iron a shirt from collar to cuffs, to avoid reverse creases. People often ask why I do this work, no profit, no fame, no growth as the world defines it. I always say, because I was once the girl no one noticed. Have you ever felt overlooked? Not because you were hated, but because they thought you didn't need anything. If you've had that moment, I hope you'll share. Maybe another Claire out there needs to know she's not alone. After the housewarming, I got more referrals from Lorraine Camille, even Jake. Not loudly, just whispers. There's someone who needs a spreadsheet like you did for me. And I met them, Teresa's Lilas Madisons. Each carried invisible baggage, a mother with dementia, lingering student loans, a life unaware of personal finance. I have no magic, but I have spreadsheets, a whiteboard and markers. Time to listen without interrupting when they talk about sleepless nights over $20 for gas. Tonight I added a line to the bulletin board where I keep Gran's photo. No one is born to be strong alone. That's the biggest lesson I've learned not from Harvard, not from management books, but from a woman who quietly clipped coupons and kept financial journals since 1982. Evelyn didn't need applause. She just needed to believe someone would carry on. And I chose to be that person. The new year is coming. I have no travel plans. No bold growth goals. But I have a list of 11 people who came to my office and left with something unmeasurable trust in themselves. I opened my notebook, wrote the first line for the new year. The 12th person will be a girl who doesn't know she's waiting to be seen. One line from her letter stays in my heart. A true legacy isn't what's left behind. It's what others choose to carry forward. And I understand Evelyn Trust isn't a fund. It's a way of living. A quiet commitment that everyone deserves to be seen. Especially the quietest ones. Some people leave, but you never have to say goodbye, because they never truly left you. 2 years after Evelyn's funeral, I'm still at the old wooden desk in the office above the laundromat. The room is still small, but no longer silent. Familiar knocks echo each afternoon, the smell of my mother's monthly waffle deliveries, and sometimes the shy laughter of women realizing it's okay to need help. Jake now sits 2 desks away. No more fancy shirts, just a sweater sleeves, rolled up hands stained with ink from writing budgets for clients new to Excel. I never imagined I'd say Jake. I need your help with this case. But now it feels natural, like we were always a team. Someone once asked Claire, does this little office really change anything? I answered, not the office. The people who walk out of here, they change themselves. Have you been that person stepping out of a small place, feeling a bit bigger inside if you have leave your name? Each name is a chapter in a living legacy. Today I met a new client, Alina 35, 2 young kids caring for a mother with Parkinson's. She came defensive, but after 45 minutes looking at her first savings plan, she whispered, "Your grandmother must have been incredible." I smiled, placed a hand on the paper she held. She's still here. Each month, my mother brings something Evelyn loved. Last time it was cinnamon apple pie, fresh fragrant. She doesn't say much, just sets it on the table and says, "Let it cool." But once I saw her linger by Evelyn's silver-framed photo, her eyes distant. She doesn't need to say, "I'm sorry" anymore. I don't need to hear it. Her actions speak loudest. I see you. I see her. I see what you've both quietly done all this time. Jake still writes financial journals for each client, something I never expected him to stick with. He says I need to look back each month to see I'm part of their journey. I nod. Because maybe that's what Evelyn wanted from us. Don't let anyone pass through your life without being seen properly at least once. The office still has no sign. But now people call it something else, Evelyn Room. Not because her name is on a plaque, but because they whisper that place there was a woman named Evelyn who thought differently about ordinary women. I close my notebook, look out the window. Late spring soft sun, a breeze carrying jasmine from the tea shop across the street. Kids laugh in the backyard. Jake's teaching a client the difference between essential and emotional expenses. At the next desk, Camille, now a collaborator, guides an elderly woman through online banking. Lorraine sends banana bread via delivery, and I quietly sitting write the final line in my 2-year summary, 28th person me now. The one who knows she wasn't abandoned, just seen through the wrong eyes. On the desk, Evelyn's framed photo sits beside her folded letter. When people ask who she was, I say, the first to teach me that silence doesn't mean weakness, and love doesn't need applause. If you're reading this, you might be part of those carrying forward a legacy in your own quiet way. I hope you keep a space small as an office above a laundromat, to know that what you do is enough and ripples further than you think. I believe we've all been Claire, quietly enduring, misjudged, nearly forgotten. But in that silence, the strongest seeds are sown. Claire's story, Evelyn's, Jake's, and the nameless women's isn't just a journey from pain to healing. It's a reminder that love doesn't need to be loud to be real. I hope after following this journey, you'll look at yourself or someone near you with kinder eyes. Maybe somewhere an Evelyn is believing in you even when you don't believe in yourself. If this story touched your heart, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following subtle, humane, quiet stories like this, hit the follow button. I'll be here telling the small things that are never unimportant.